afternoon. I think I know everyone that's here, but just in case, I'm Joy Morgan. I'm the pastor here at Heflin First United Methodist Church, and we are so glad that you're here, and we are so excited about being able to host this event for the district. I could tell stories, I guess, about traveling to the Holy Land with Monica and her husband Joey, or the years that we spent together in a group studying and reading. When I think of Monica, I think of ugly Christmas sweaters and cats and Converse. Most of all, I think of a person kind, is loving, and truly exudes Christ wherever she goes. Whether it's in the middle of a difficult conversation or whether it's listening as you fall apart, that she just, to me, exudes the peace of Christ. And so we're so thankful that you're here to share with us. Monica is the executive director of United Counseling, which is our conference's counseling services, and they have multiple locations. And I'm hoping that we can find a way to have Monica or some of her staff here with us in our district in the coming months. But that's about all I have. So before you speak, if I could share a prayer of thanksgiving for you being here, then I'll turn it over to you. Let's pray together. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for your presence that has promised to never leave us. And we pray that presence would surround us in the time together, your presence of peace, your presence of hope, your presence of comfort, that you might share with us afresh and anew your Holy Spirit, your breath of life, and to help us to find new ways that we might experience your presence and experience a fresh breath of your Holy Spirit in those moments that are most trying. We pray these things in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. Good afternoon. This is my first time to Heflin, so very cute, beautiful day to be here. I'm so sorry that I was late. Based on the traffic on the interstate, everybody's coming to Heflin, so I consider myself lucky to be here. Like Joy said, I serve as the director of United Counseling, and I'm ordained in the United Methodist Church, but before ordination, I worked for a number of years in the field of mental health, and I'm an LPC, maintained that license as I served as an associate pastor and through different avenues of the conference, and then it's sort of kind of come to a full merge in this particular position I'm in, which has been really great and frustrating, and I don't really know what I'm doing half the time, but I just keep showing up and doing it. And this is one of those times where I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I'm showing up with you guys and we are doing it together. I was invited to talk to you about, back when the pandemic started, I started getting all of these invites to do Zoom meetings with different groups to talk about the impact of the pandemic and how are we supposed to get through this, and what are we going to look like when we come out on the other side. And I was doing all of these Zoom meetings. I was like, this is so refreshing to not be talking about division in the United Methodist Church. Like, this pandemic has just been a pressure release valve for me. But I thought I would just be doing it for a couple of months. And of course, the pandemic has shown us that it is much more than that. But it has reminded me of when I was really early in my faith, meaning I grew up cradle on United Methodist Church, but I think that the kind of exponential growth in my faith started happening once I was married and we were attending a church together regularly, and I started taking notes in my Bible like good church attenders do, and the pastor at that time was moving through the book of Romans, and he got to Romans 5, the very beginning of that chapter, where they're talking about how we should boast in our sufferings because sufferings produce perseverance, perseverance produces character, character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint, which is the next slide. I don't know what wizard is working that, but is that me? Am I supposed to do it? Neil. Thank you. That this passage that he spent time on, I was just writing desperately in my Bible because I think it was one of the first times when things clicked for me, where I understood there was a process to this faith journey that we're on, and that there is a trajectory that we're working towards. And although it may be a mess in the midst, that it is something that we are always looking to the next place. And many times in Scripture, they talk about how we need to celebrate tribulation and rejoice in sufferings. And us today, like in our contemporary lives, we read that feeling like that we should high five in suffering, like, oh yes, catastrophe, we're supposed to rejoice in that. But if you step back from that, I think what we really need to hear is that we shouldn't waste the chaos, and that we shouldn't waste the suffering, that there is some fruit that is going to come from this. But we have the agency and we have the voice to produce. So when we are in the midst of crisis, we are in the midst of trauma, we are in the midst of just a really stinky day, we have choices to make. And those choices can either be to sit and wallow and complain and be miserable, or we can begin to make choices of what can come from this, how is this impacting me, how is it impacting the people around me, and what can I do about that? And that's when we begin to move into this idea of what a window of tolerance and resiliency looks like. So on this next slide, when we think about resiliency, we usually are thinking about, usually hear people say, when you snap back, Resiliency is getting back moving forward. So going through something difficult and coming out of that in a better place, in a more hopeful place than you ever were in the past. So even you can look at when I work with couples and they're having problems in their marriage, and there's been some offense or hurt or something like that, and they are sort of dreaming and remembering about the way things used to be. We just want to get back to that. And we have to really intentionally get to the place of saying that's actually not what this process is. We are actually not going to work at returning to some place. We are doing the work of moving into a new place and what that new place can be for us. That is the work of resiliency that we get to do regardless of your age, regardless of your place in life. Like, we have an opportunity to be resilient. And I have been saying from the beginning that I really think that we are raising probably the most resilient generation of young people to come through in quite some time, because these young people have are experienced a pandemic just like we have, political climate, faith climates. They have had to learn to pivot and adjust and pivot and adjust and pivot and adjust. They have had to figure out how to learn online and in virtual capacities. They've had to figure things out for themselves and not be fed, like spoon-fed things constantly. And so through all of this really messy, difficult things, we're actually producing a generation of young people who will be the most resilient generation that we have seen, because they have had to employ this idea of resiliency. When you're looking at some of the work of trauma, and you look at some of the work of post-traumatic stress disorder, you look at how an entire population of people engage in something that is a crisis, and we assume everyone's going to be impacted in a negative way from that. But all of this research shows that 2/3 of us really get through difficult things kind of unscathed. We might have some bumps and some bruises, but we don't really have any kind of clinical setback with that. That happens to a small portion of the population. And this really became apparent this year, and it doesn't have anything to do with COVID. It has everything to do with 9/11. So this was the 20th anniversary of the date. Looking out here, I think everybody remembers. And at that time, if you'll remember, catastrophic, right? World was ending, we were being attacked, people were terrified. We were seeing images that we can still recall in our minds today. And we're watching this and we're thinking, it's always going to be like this. This is how it will always be. I will always feel frightened. I will always feel under threat. I will always feel unsafe. And what they found is that that's not true. In the heart of that, if you just took 2 months out from 9/11, most of the world was back doing what the world does. Even the people in New York City were back engaging and living a life pretty similar to what they were living on September 10th of that year. That return is what's most common for people. Now, of course, you have the people who were directly impacted, who had loss, who had all of the tragedy that you would imagine, and those people do have significant trauma in their life. But most of the world and most of the population return back to their average place of functioning. And we have seen that very same thing happen with the pandemic. When it first started, there was going to be a rush of people with anxiety and depression, and we were going to have such elevated levels of mental health care that we're going to be overwhelmed. The system is going to be overwhelmed, even more than it already was. And that was true in the very beginning. But then as time has gone on, it begins to level out again. And people begin to return back to their average, hopefully healthy place of functioning and engaging. And the only way that we do that is by employing resiliency. And so when we think about resiliency, we have to think about two things. We have to think about our mindset, and then we have to think about something that we call the flexibility sequence. So for our mindset, the biggest keys that we look for that's going to help us become the most resilient people is optimism. Feeling like there's a problem and we can solve it. We can get through this, we can do this, that really optimistic thinking. You have confidence in your ability to cope. We've done hard things before. We can do hard things again, which is why I say our generation of young people will be the most resilient, because they have already done hard things. So they're going to be more apt to be able to do hard things again. And then understanding it as a sense of challenge. So when difficulties come up, you don't see it as we're never going to get through this, we'll never be the same, we don't have anything that can help us solve this problem. That kind of mindset diminishes your capacity to cope. So if you can cultivate optimism, if you can have confidence in your ability to actually survive and do hard things, and if you can see things as a sense of challenge, you have the mindset for resiliency that we're looking for. But it's this flexibility sequence that I feel like is most helpful. So let's say a problem comes up in the church and in this building, and it's a big problem and people are afraid. And so you have to look at the context. So what's going on? What do we know about this problem? We look at what our resources are. Okay, who do we have around us? What kind of materials do we have? What is it that we need? And then you start doing the work. And then once you start doing the work, you check back. Is what we're doing actually working? Is this helpful? Are we moving forward in this problem solving? And if you're not, you pivot and you start all over again. Okay, so what's the problem? What are our resources? Is what we're doing working? And so you do that for a while till it's not working, and then you pivot and you start over again. And you do that for a while till it's not working, and then you pivot. So this ability to be flexible, this ability to identify what the problem is, identify what your resources are, and be willing to adjust and to change. If you're able to do that with an optimistic mindset, with confidence in your ability to do the work, you are going to be a resilient group of people. And if you model that in front of the young people in your lives, you're teaching them how to be resilient people, which is a life skill, which is necessary for survival, and which will bring them closer and closer to success than some of the other things that we sort of put our energies into. Okay, and please, if y'all have questions, please don't hesitate to ask those as we go. Okay, on the next slide is our window of tolerance, and I've talked about this a good bit. I talk about it in every aspect of the work that I do, in every aspect of the life that we live, and this is simply an easy visual because we all know what a window looks like. We know what an open window looks like, and we know what a closed window looks like. And each of us are walking around here, and we're particular windows, and we either have really wide openings, our window is wide open, or, really early on in the pandemic, we had like barely a crack of light coming through that window. And our goal is to have really wide open windows, because what happens is you reach some sort of obstacle in your life and you're trying to deal with it, cope with it, make decisions. If your window is really wide, you have all this wiggle room to adjust, to engage with people, to make those decisions. But if you are walking around super stressed, really limited, unable to really be at the top of your game, and your window is really, really small, you have zero wiggle room. So you are more apt to hit the roof, to react to people in a way that you regret, that's going to involve apologies later. You will say and do things that misrepresent your character, and you're acting out of adrenaline and fear. And so we are wanting to get to that place of like smooth sailing, that green area. And we do that through, you guys are familiar with fight or flight or freeze. Someone jumps out from around the corner and scares you. You're either gonna pull your fist back, ready to defend yourself and fight. You are either gonna cut and run, so you can outrun the threat, or you're just gonna freeze and not do anything. These are our natural reactions to a threat, and when our windows are really, really, really small, we are gonna fight, we are gonna flee, and we are gonna freeze. So we have to do the work, which is the resiliency work, that gets us to that green area of our window. There's a great resource, and I have it on the last page for you guys, that is about quick resets. That is really, really helpful, especially, it's always geared towards children, but adults need this just as much as children do. And it's the resource for resilience, and there are little videos, if you scroll down to the bottom, that helps, especially like educators, people who have lots of young people in a group, and you'll have that child or a couple of children who are just kind of going off the rails a little bit, and that's contagious. You have one kid going off of the rails, and all of a sudden half the class is going off of the rails, and then you're last man standing kind of a thing. And you know that you've got to do some sort of intervention to reset them, because they have moved up into what we call hyperarousal. That's where highly anxious, agitated, very distractible, lots of energy. They need to do a quick reset to get back into the green area. And there's great videos on how the benefits of humming, where you're just humming, and you get the whole class to do that. Benefits of breaking out into a song. Benefits of doing something high energy or heavy with our bodies to bring them back into attunement with their bodies. These sorts of things, like I said, that are directed towards children benefit us, okay? So when you find yourself in that place of hyperarousal, there are things that we need to do that bring us back, do a quick reset. Many of those are like grounding techniques. Use those a lot, where you're engaging your senses, you're smelling, you're tasting, you're listening to something. Anything that brings you back into the moment and gets you out of this like toxic anxiety spiral that you have going on in your head. And the flip side of that is that hypoarousal, which is the depression, lethargy, you're unmotivated, just not doing anything. It's kind of the freeze aspect of the response to a threat. And it's the same thing. We have to find something, a quick reset that gets us back into that green space. How many of you guys in here feel like you're fighters? If someone jumps out, are you gonna throw a fist, throw a punch? How many are just gonna run? All you gotta do is outrun the person with you, and then you feel like you are succeeding. And then how many of you just absolutely freeze and can't do anything? Yes. We all have that, and knowing what you are, being self-aware enough to say, I know that when my response to a threat, I tend to freeze more than I do anything. That's our first step at moving back into that green space. If I know that I'm a fighter and I will like elevate and escalate really quickly, then I know that I've got to employ things that de-escalate me and bring me back into that green place. Because it's in that green area where all of the good work is being done. Do you have any questions about that?
Where on the last page is what you were talking about?
It is under the websites, resources for resilience.com. It's the very first one. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. You gave some examples about, in a classroom, but, what's a specific thing, like what would you tell an adult, some things to do to get them back in that green space?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the question is, that's good and all for the little kids, but what are we going to do for the adults who are in that hyperarousal? Separating them from whatever the trigger is. So if it could be loud noises, that has like brought someone up to a stage of panic or high anxiety. Focusing on breathing, so doing deep breaths alongside them, not just telling them to breathe deeply, engaging with them, doing that with them as well. I'm a big advocate for using ice whenever someone is super elevated, putting ice on the back of someone's neck, having them hold it in their hands. It's just shocking your system that says, oh, what's going on? That's really cold. And it brings you back down. Going for a walk, particular music. When I'm working with teenagers, I always have them create a playlist that's their like chill playlist that they really only listen to when they need to de-escalate. Or if they tend towards hypoarousal, what is that hype playlist, that the music that you listen to that really gets you elevated and excited and everything like that. So knowing that adult is helpful, but if it's a stranger or someone that you don't know, it's that breath work, it's the engaging the senses. What is it that you can smell? What is it that you can see? What is it that you can hear? Give me 3 textures that you can feel. All of that is doing is getting you out of your head and back into the moment. So any kind of mindfulness activity like that. Great. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, with both of those, the hyper and the hypo, as far as adults go, where do you see the adults that fall into, having some issues? Where do you see them falling the most?
Hyper or hypo?
I don't think the hypo, but I don't know.
It's both. And in an average day for myself, I like to visit all the places of my window. So it's not necessarily we don't ever go there, it's not letting ourselves get stuck there. There are particular situations where I will tend to freeze and get into that depressive, disconnect, withdraw, stick to myself. I don't really want to engage with people, that hypo arousal. And that's when I'm like internally criticizing myself, or I should have done better about that, and that kind of brings me down. But there's those times too, and for me, it's more environmental that I can get into that hyper arousal. And it's a lot of like, if I'm around a lot of people, if there's a lot of racket and noise, if I can't hear what someone is trying to say to me, if we're eating in a restaurant and I can't hear like the person across from me, I can get really agitated. So we all do that. We visit all the places of your window, but we want to spend most of our time in the green area. And if you can recognize what your tendencies are, if you're self-aware enough to say, oh, this is going to be a rough night because we're going to this place and I know that the environment's like this, then you can do prep work. You can not be caught by surprise. You can have an exit plan. You can tell whoever you're with, like, sit close to me so I can hear what you're saying. So self-awareness is the very first, most important part of that kind of work. But in the clinical setting that where I see people, I think it's equal. With kids, I see more of the hyper because that's the behavior we'll notice most about children. But with adults, it is a fair mix of both. Anything else? Okay, we are going to go over, I've chosen like 3 practices that I find to be really helpful for staying in the green space. And these are things that can be done on your own, that you can do if you have kids at home, if you work with people of different ages. These are all very employable across the board, okay? So the first one is the locus of control. It's that next slide. The locus of control. This is that very simple idea of I can control the things I can control, but I can't control the things that I can't control, okay? Which sounds really simple. I'm not going to worry about that. I don't have control over that. But if it was really simple, we wouldn't have such an issue with it, okay? So this is just an example that I came up with when I was doing kind of early pandemic work with people. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of trepidation about returning to school or to worship, being around people again. And you would see children a lot being very, very anxious about maybe they live with their grandparent who is immunocompromised and they're about to return to in-person school, and all they've heard at home is that if grandmother gets sick, she won't survive COVID. And then the flip side of that is you're going to go off to school where no one cares about COVID. You could bring it home. So you're this child, and that's a very stressful load to carry. And so we look at listing the things that we can control and the things that we can't control. And so in that orange circle, you come up with the things that you can control, okay? And so in this example, I said you can control your attitude, how you treat others, what you choose to follow and who you choose to follow on social media, who you choose to respond to, how you choose to act and respond to difficult people. You can have control over when you go to sleep and if you exercise and what you watch. You can have control over how you spend your free time, what you read. You can have control over whether or not you wash your hands or you wear a mask or you go to events. You know, you start listing these things that you actually do have control of. And then you start listing all of the things that you have zero control over. And that's everything from, we have no control over the weather. We don't have control over natural disasters. We don't have control over how tall I am. I don't have control over what people think about me or what their opinions are or how they act or react to me. I don't have control over what everyone says and does. I only have control over what I can say and do. And this is really diminishes anxiety so fast if you can sit and you just make two columns, what I can and what I can't. And whether you're sitting there by yourself doing this or whether you're sitting there with another person, and all of a sudden you start seeing that column of what I can control get bigger and bigger and bigger, you start making a choice to put your energy into those places. Well, I do have control over all of this stuff. You know, and you can choose to put your energy there. And this straight comes from the work Viktor Frankl did, who was a concentration camp survivor and came up with a particular therapy modality. And he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Has anybody read that in here? I feel like as a human, it should be required reading because he was able to look at an environment where people were literally stripped of everything. They had no choice in the matter. They had no opinion. They had no voice. They had no name. And he was able to watch, and he was one of them, the people who survived that circumstance versus the people who didn't. And the people who were more apt to survive were able to look at this mindset of optimism, having confidence in their ability to cope, feeling like they actually had control over their attitude for the day. If they only got these few crumbs for a meal, they chose that to be thankful for that and to have gratitude for that instead of to be victimized by that. And it's that mindset that ushered them into the survival mode instead of resigning to the way things are and nothing's ever going to change. And those people lost their life much, much sooner. So this is an exercise that even if you're looking at, I have a hard Monday tomorrow, I don't want to wake up and get out of bed and start it because it's just, I don't like any of the things I have to do tomorrow. You sit and you make a list of all of the things that you can control to make your day better, and all of a sudden you feel like you have control over a day that had control over you. And you flip that power dynamic, and all of a sudden you're the one feeling like you're calling the shots instead of just passively receiving a stink day, if that makes sense. Okay. This next one, I kind of want you guys to take a minute at your table. We know that gratitude is a thing. Oprah says it's a thing. Science says it's a thing. You're supposed to keep a journal next to your bed, and you're supposed to list 5 things that you're grateful for that day. And it's a thing because our brains always have the opportunity to change. So if you think about our brains like Play-Doh, and you know that really fresh, new canister of Play-Doh, and it is the softest. Like, it feels so good. It's new and it's fresh. It hasn't been like molded with other colors, and it's just perfect. That's like the brains of children. You know, it's so easily moldable, and you can shape it super easily into whatever that you want. Those neural pathways in our brains are so flexible when kids are young. But see, as we get older, that same like Play-Doh starts to get a little dried out. And it's not that it can't be molded, it just takes a little more time. You might have to sit and like warm it up in your hands for a few minutes, or you might have to like just like put elbow grease into it to get it to form the way that you want it to be. But that's what our brains are like. No matter what our age is, we can change our brains. We can create new pathways, and it all happens through the choices of our thinking. And it's hard work because we have a tendency to go negative all the time. You know, we do those like scary what if scenarios, and nothing good is going to come from this. We have this negative schema that we live our life out of, and that's our brain's default, is to always go that easy pathway that's been created for us. But if we do the work of recognizing and intentionally naming things throughout our day that are good, that are blessings, that creates a new pathway, and after some time, that becomes your brain's default, and it moves into that pathway much, much easier. And so Oprah says it and science says it, so I think that we can feel comfortable in that. But what we know is we want you to do more than just say what you're grateful for, say what good happened today. They did this study, and they just had people for 5 days do this. And then they did another measure. And just after 5 days, a remarkable amount of change had happened in their perspective and in their outlook. And it's because they answered the question, why? So let's say I had on my list, let's say, worship was really good today, so I'm grateful for that. But then I have to ask the question, why? Okay? So maybe it was really good today because there were people there that had not been coming for a while. Or maybe they sang my favorite music. Or maybe it was a special Sunday and they honored someone that I cared about. Or maybe there was a message that really spoke to me directly. It's important to say, I'm grateful for worship, but it's more important to say why. Because if we're able to identify the why in these gratitudes, then you can start creating patterns, okay? So if worship was really great today because there was some friends that you had not seen in a while, and that's what made it really great, then you might be more apt the next week to touch base with them and to say, hey, do you think you'll be there on Sunday? I really enjoyed seeing you. You're trying to recreate the pattern. This training was really great today. Why? Because the snacks were wonderful, okay? So if that's your why, then maybe you want to pick up some similar snacks on your way home, or do something like that. So it doesn't have to be like the heavenly host descended and I felt touched. It can be like there was some donuts, and I haven't had donuts in a while, and that was really good. And that's a pattern that maybe I want to splurge on regularly. So just take a minute at your table and just think of one thing, one good thing, either today or yesterday, and then identify like why you consider that it was good. So just for a second, talk to the people at your table.
I got to meet Runner's dad.
Does anyone have an example of something that came up that's a good example of a good thing and why it's a good thing? Why it worked for them? Absolutely no good things happening out there. It's good. It means that we have something to work towards. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll share mine. And I had worked with a lady years ago at Gadsden State at Fort McClellan, and we were good friends. We weren't like just real close friends, but we enjoyed each other's company when we would meet up in the coffee lounge and all that. And she had been diagnosed with cancer back then, and it's been a good many years ago. And when I left, I told her, I said, I'm going to continue to pray for you and all that. And she had some bad times, and then I just didn't hear from her anymore through email. She wasn't on Facebook. And I really was concerned, but then that's awful, but I kind of forgot about it. And today at lunch, she walked in with her husband and looked wonderful, and it was like Lazarus. Yeah, I mean,
yes.
Not really, but I really did not expect to see her looking like that. And it was such. My lunch was good, but like you say, why was it good? It was because I saw this friend and she was doing well.
That's great. That's a good example. Anything else? Yes.
Mine. So, my morning was good because my baby, my about to be 22-month-old, has had trouble with her speech, and she spent the night at my parents' house last night. And when I talked to her this morning, and she got on the phone and said, "Hey, mommy," and she told her sister say too, "Hey, sissy," this morning. So that was a good.
Yeah, that's
so
wonderful.
Speech therapy is helping.
Yeah. That's great. This is also a really good practice to do with your kids, young people, whatever age that you may be with. I know most of you probably heard, at the dinner table we do highs and lows, or whatever cute names they're called. What's something good today? Something that made me happy, something that made me sad. If you've ever had teenagers and you say, how was your day? The answer is fine. Yeah. And so you can always rephrase that and say, tell me something good about your day. Tell me what was good. And then that begins an actual conversation instead of just a one answer question. And so this practice is really good and helps us learn to be curious about ourselves, but also curious about other people. Even if you're standing in line and you turn around and say, tell me something good that's happened to you today. And they say, oh, well, I made all the green lights in town and didn't get stopped. It makes you begin a conversation and creates curiosity. And curiosity breeds relationship. And when you have relationship, it is really, really, really hard to be judgmental or ugly or to think poor things, which is what happens when we're on social media. We're not in relationship. And so we feel like we have free reign to espouse whatever has crossed our mind and to judge everyone else who is doing the same thing. Yet, if you were standing in line together, having a conversation about the very same topic, it would not go down the way that it did on Facebook. And so that's what steals our ability or our desire to be curious and to be engaged and to name the good that's around us and to help those other people name the good as well. So that is a really important practice for resiliency. The last one is called savoring. And when we say that word savoring, we're usually thinking about food, right? I'm not a slow eater. Who are the slow eaters in here? Yes, I am the eater where I have to consciously pace myself if we go somewhere so that I can track with you, because if left to my own devices, I will eat as if you were about to take my plate from me and I will never have another meal again. And so I savor nothing when it comes to food. And if I want to, I have to force myself to do that. That's taking that Play-Doh and it's like putting that elbow grease into it, and it is trying to create new pathways. But the savoring that builds resiliency is the savoring of moments. And I tell you what, I love a good funeral. And the reason I love a good funeral is because every funeral I've been to, and I've been to a fair number of funerals, all of them very sad, right? Every single funeral I've been to, I hear people laughing. And I hear people telling stories. And that whole visitation line are people wanting to share with the loved one a memory of, oh, remember when Ed did this and he stopped and helped change my flat tire, or and they're sharing funny stories and they're savoring the memory of that person. And that's something that is so, so important to keep us in that green space, is that idea of savoring things from the past, telling stories, family, the same family stories, you may tell them at Thanksgiving or the remember whens, or looking through pictures and you say, remember when this happened, or you dressed like this for Halloween. Kids love to hear their birth stories. They love to hear you tell about the day that they were born and all of the chaos and the excitement that happened. Kids love to hear you tell stories about them to other people because you are savoring these moments and these memories together. So taking time and thinking about things, and Thanksgiving is coming up and we're generally, with family during that time, taking time to savor those memories of the past or people that have gone before us are really, really important for our own emotional health and resiliency. Learning how to savor things in the present. We take pictures all the time and of everything, and we don't remember anything. Your memory is so much greater the less pictures that you take. There are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures on my phone, and I take them so I won't forget. But the fact is, when we are taking pictures to remember, it's giving our brain permission to forget. But if we take fewer pictures and we just sit in the moment and we appreciate what is happening in front of us, we are more apt and more able to retell that story and to relive that story than if we had taken 500 pictures. So learning how to savor things in the present is really, really important. And then also having something to look forward to in the future. Whether, and I'm not sure what settings or avenues that has brought you together today, or what places that you may work or live or worship, but coming together as a family or as a team or as a staff or as a congregation and being able to say, oh my goodness, we get to have our Christmas party this year and we haven't been able to have it for a year or two. And having something that you are really looking forward to is so important, especially if we are in the trenches of really hard things. We need something that helps sort of count those days down and moves us in the direction of positivity. So it could be, Friday I get to have lunch with a friend, or I get to go get donuts because I had them last week and they were so good. It can be something, a big event, or it can be just small things that you are looking forward to that become a savoring element for you. So even if you're sitting at home with your family and fall break is coming up or Thanksgiving is coming up and you're thinking, what is it that you want to be sure to do in this break? What is it that you're looking forward to? Teaching them to kind of begin to anticipate and savor the goodness that is to come. Those are the practices that really help us maintain that place of health and resiliency, and that keeps our windows really, really open. And they can be done across the board, across ages, across stages of life, and they help us cultivate a mindset of, this is simply just a challenge. I'm equipped, I have resources, I have done it before, we can do it again, and we're going to come out of this better than we were before we started. And that's all that we can do when we are in places where we don't feel like we have control or agency or choice, and that we're sort of caught in that hamster wheel of some crisis that's happening. Those are the things that kind of help step us out of it and move us into these places of not only surviving, but really enjoying the process along the way. Now, I do have resources for you guys. This is very limited. There are tons of resources out there, whether it is websites. I included some good books for kids that really help re-emphasize some of this sort of character trait of grit and resiliency. And you guys may have more that you can offer up too that you feel like are really good. Podcasts. I don't know if you guys are podcast listeners, but there's some really great podcasts out there. And then also apps. I have a mental health folder on my phone that is full of varied apps, different, whether it's mood tracking or breathing or mindfulness or suicide safety plans. It is a huge folder because I sit down with people, because everybody has a phone, and I help them find resources that they will always have in their back pocket. And there's some really, really great resources as apps that are really good. So if you're new to mindfulness or meditation, if you have trouble sleeping, there's great sleep stories out there that most people don't ever hear the ending to it because the voices are so meditative and calm. It sort of ushers them into sleep. There are great mood tracking, diary, journaling apps. There are great, if suicide is a concern for yourself or your loved one, there's some great safety plan apps out there. I certainly hope that you're doing something other than just an app, if there's that threat that's going on. And I also put a couple of numbers for young people on there. There's a text number and a call number for a crisis. And if you do work with young people, just have them put that in their phone. Doesn't mean that you think that their life is in danger, but I'll tell you what, they're going to be the first person that finds out that their friend's life is in danger. And they want to be able to say, hey, call this number, hey, text this person, hey, reach out here. So all this is doing is about equipping people so that if you're the first line of defense when it comes to a crisis, that you have a tool that you can share and hand off to someone. Because it feels miserable to sit there and say, I got nothing for you, Good luck with that. So we always just want to have tools ready to go. So if there's not anything on there that piques your interest, just look something up, put an issue in and see what comes up, experiment. If you don't like it, delete that app, find another one, pivot, be ready to pivot every time. Any resources you want to be sure to offer up that you know of that are really great? Any questions? Well, all right, guys. I am so thankful for Joy and the work that she did hosting and putting this on. I'm going to turn it back over to you. And thank you guys for listening and for having me. Thank you so much, Monica, for coming and sharing with us. Was there anyone that did not enter their name for our drawings that would like to do that before we draw?
I did not, but I did not want to.
Are you sure? All right. I said before I came up the first time, I've tripped on the steps coming up here before. I was hoping I wouldn't do it today, so not quite done yet. But thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. If you did not get Monica's PowerPoint presentation, the notes from that, they're on the way out. You can get them. They're on the table on the left. There's also a separate packet that has a list of local resources. It is not extensive. I'm sure there are many others that are available in our area. And if you have those and want to share them with us, we would love to know about them. We do have a few giveaways, and I'm going to start with the ones that are for children. And if this is not one that would be helpful for you, then you please pass it along to someone that could use it. During the time that everything was shut down and we were worshiping online and everything, I ordered this book online to share with Hannah Kate, and so I ordered another copy because we love it and we read it regularly. It's Right Now I'm Fine. I don't know if you use that book or if anybody here has read it, but it talks about snuggling a stuffed animal, so I thought you needed that to go with it. So this is going to Miss Ricketta. So you can put the book in the library if you want to, or you can keep it. This second one has a book that is the story of the 3 little pigs and the big bad wolf, but in the story, the wolf loses his breath, and so the 3 little pigs are yogis that teach him breathing exercises, and so I think it's great as well. This one is going to Carrie. I have a feeling that some nieces might get that.
Or I might just keep it myself.
There you go. We have, this is a mixture from Nifty Nest and from Sarah Matilda's. We've got some bath bombs, some shower steamers, and candle to help you breathe and, yeah. Okay, so this one's going to Miss Pam. two more. This one is for a massage with Zeta. Everybody says, ooh.
Can I put my name in again?
You have 3 little pigs.
This is for Sherry Elliott. We've got one more. This is our Pinhoti basket. And it's so beautiful. Tammy did this one. You can tell the difference between our baskets, but it's great. It's got a hat, a t-shirt, a mug, and then a hiking journal from Nifty Nest, and along with some Pinhoti stickers. And this is for Ashley Lyons. Those are all the giveaways I have, but I am just so thankful for all that we're all able to take home. So thank you again, Monica, for sharing all of these resources with us, and thank you, Cheryl, for allowing us to do this as a district today, and for not saying, why do you want to do that, when I said I really, really want. Monica shared with us online several months ago, and I wanted more people to be able to hear what she shared. So thank you for doing this. And that is all. Thank y'all so much for coming, and be sure, if you did not check out some of the resource tables at the back or get the handouts on your way, and please be sure to get those before you go, and some refreshments. Yes, and they are good. Those are from WM, so get whatever refreshments you want from over there. Thank you.
I really enjoy it.